Well, listen, it is that time again. That's right. We are here, ready and empowered to empower you in your relationships. That's right. Listen, you are not here by accident. You are not here by happenstance. Listen, you're not here even by coincidence. You are here by divine providence. You are here by choice. You are here because you recognize that, listen, like you, like others, like myself, we all need to be empowered. We all need to be encouraged. We all need to be informed. And we all need to know how to strategize in our relationships. And so, listen, I am Marcus Ruffin. Listen, I'm a pastor, I'm a therapist, and because, listen, I have a theological background, I have a therapeutic psychology background. It is the marrying of the two that I bring to you so that you might understand spiritually how to empower your relationships. You might understand practically how to empower your relationships. Why? Because, listen, you and I do not know all that we need to know to make the kind of impact, to make the kind of change, to have the kind of fulfillment in our relationship simply because we're in one. That's right. Simply because you're in one doesn't mean that you know what you need to do now that you're in it. And so, listen, I am excited about being here with you today. As you all know, listen, here's what we say to you. If you're on our YouTube channel, listen, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button, by clicking on that bell icon so that, listen, you can not just be a part of this, but you can be a part of all the empowerment that we offer here at Life Empowerment. And so if you're with us on our Facebook page, then I'm saying to you, like our page, follow us. There's a follow mechanism that you have to hit. And listen, we are here for you. Listen, we are here to empower your relationships. That's right. This is what Ruffin It is all about. And here's the last thing we always say. Listen, because we're not here by ourselves. Listen, you may be in relationship with yourself, but more than likely you're in relationship with another individual. You're in a relationship with other individuals. And so therefore we always say, listen, if we're going to be together, let's learn together. Let's be empowered together. And so, listen, I am encouraging you to go ahead and to share this link. Listen, if you're on YouTube, listen, you can share the link. If you're on Facebook, you can start a watch party. You can bring people. You can put their names in the comments section, and it will bring them right into this space and place. And listen, if you're watching this on the rebroadcast side, you weren't here for the live side, then hey, we still encourage you to do the same. And we thank you so much for being here today. And we're also saying this to you today, that listen, if you have questions in the midst of why we are doing this particular teaching, while we are talking about relationships, if you have questions, listen, you can ask those questions in the here and now. You can ask them right live if you are on our YouTube page or YouTube channel. If you are on our Facebook page, then listen, you can ask those questions. And listen, we are here to be able to answer them in real time. So, Cousin Gwendolyn, we thank you for being here. Marilyn, we thank you for being here. Those are the few people I see that have joined us here so far. And so, listen, we want to go ahead and get started. We want to go ahead and dive into what we're talking about today. And listen, what we're talking about today is dangerous expectations in relationships. That's right. Listen, we're talking about dangerous expectations in relationships. And so as we are moving into this new series that we're going to be addressing, this new series that we're going to be unraveling, listen, we thank you so much for being here. But we know that, listen, you want to know how to ensure that you don't have dangerous expectations in your relationships. And so, listen, go ahead and look at the screen behind me. And so, listen, we always like to start off with a particular passage from the Bible. Why? Because, listen, we want to understand the theological and the psychological. We understand the spiritual and the practical. And so here in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 12, I'm reading this from the Amplified Bible, and it reads this way. It says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when desire is fulfilled, it is a tree of life. So here, when we see this particular passage, I want to just take a little time to break this down because it really speaks to where we're going today. And it says hope. When you translate that word hope is translated as expectation. Listen, you can't have hope without having expectation. And then when you move further down that verse, it says hope deferred. What it is saying is when something is delayed or something is not met, when expectations are not met, notice it says it will make the heart. Here it's talking about the mind, the will, and the emotions. It says that, listen, it will make the heart sick. Expectations not met, listen, will make your mind sick. It'll make your will sick. It will make your emotions sick. And it all depends on the level and the type of expectation can determine just how sick it can make you and I become. But notice here when it says sick, it's not just talking about a disease per se. It's also talking about afflicting or affliction. It's talking about grieving. You know, when you have something that has been lost, there's a thing called grief. And so we often talk about it when we lose a person. But listen, when you have lost something, it can also be a type of grief. And so he says that, listen, when you are having expectations that are not met, when you're having expectations that are not fulfilled, he says, listen, it will make you sick. It will make you afflicted. It will cause grief. It will cause you to be dis-ease. Yes, that's right. Listen, expectations can literally create a sickness in your body. That's right. Listen, I'm telling you, you want to tune in today because you want to understand just how in-depth expectations really run. And sometimes we just consider it to just be a sort of minor, kind of casual ordeal. But listen, expectations run deep in terms of who we are and the impact that it has on our relationships. And so here it goes on to say that notice now, hope deferred makes the heart sick. It says, but when desire or when expectation is fulfilled, when it has been met, it says that it is a tree of life. It says that it is joy, that there is fulfillment. And so I would like to kind of translate this passage and say it with those words that we have kind of defined so that you read it with the definition in mind. And here's one way that we could take that same passage and read it this way. Expectations not met makes the mind, will, and emotion sick, afflicted, grieve, disease. But when the expectation is met, there is life, there is joy, and there is fulfillment. That's right. Listen, there's another particular translation, and it says it this way. It says, not getting what you want can make you feel sick, but a wish that comes true is a life-giving tree. And so I'm telling you that, listen, as you are tuning in and as you are thinking about expectations, and as we have just read what we have seen here in the Bible, we understand that, listen, expectations impact your spirit. Expectations impact your soul. Expectations can impact your body. And therefore, this is why it behooves you and I to really understand this concept, to understand this practical thing that we call expectations, and to really understand how they work, how they function, so that we are having expectations that are working for us versus having expectations that work against us. And so here's the first thing I would like to kind of point out to you is that when we talk about expectations, when we talk about hope, we're talking about something that can be realistic versus something that is unrealistic. That's right. Listen, when it comes to expectations, it is recognizing that you and I can have expectations that are realistic. You and I can have expectations that are unrealistic or idealistic. And because we can have expectations that are either unrealistic or may I say realistic or idealistic, the reality is this, is that you and I were born with expectations. Whether they are idealistic or whether they are realistic, the fact is that you and I have them. Every relationship that you and I have comes with expectations. I don't care whether you're talking about marriage. When you go to the altar and you marry that person, there's something that we call vows that we say. Those are nothing more than expectations. When you and I begin to start a new job and we sign a contract, that this is basically saying that there are expectations. The contract lays out the expectations. The job performance outline tells us the expectations. It tells us what is the company expecting from you and I. The question isn't so much about these expectations that exist. The question really is, are those expectations idealistic or are those expectations realistic? See, if you and I do not know the difference between our expectations, not to mention the expectations that we have for the relationship, if you and I do not have clarity and understanding surrounding these expectations, then I tell you what's going to happen is that we're going to have all types of challenges simply because where we're getting started, the foundation, the expectations are not clear, they're not realistic, maybe they're not even known. And so simply because I don't know them doesn't mean that they don't exist. And so therefore, here's what we say. Unexamined expectations are the seeds of trouble and conflict. Let me just say that again. Listen. Unexamined expectations are the seeds of trouble and conflict. Remember we just read over here that expectations not met will make the mind, the will, and the emotions sick, will make the mind and will and the emotions afflicted, will make the mind and the will and the emotions diseased, grieve. But when the expectation is met, there is life, there is joy, there is fulfillment. And so when we're looking at whether or not our expectations are idealistic or realistic, it is the expectations and the misunderstandings that set us up for ongoing disappointment, ongoing conflict, ongoing trouble. It is this realization that without examination, that what happens along the way is that we develop what I call expectation scripts. And what I mean by that is that we establish a pattern of expectations. And so therefore, when we begin to establish this pattern of expectations, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about friendships, doesn't matter if we're talking about professional relationships, whether we're talking about personal or marriage or parental or even sibling relationships. The reality is that we begin to get into a certain mode of expectations, a certain way of developing expectations, a certain way of putting forth expectations that we expect to go a certain way. I mean, when was the last time that you and I even examined our expectations? When was the last time that you and I even thought about our expectations? When was the last time you've been even challenged on your expectations? And so therefore, without understanding that there are different pieces to expectations, it could very well be true that the expectations that you currently have are idealistic. The expectations you have about your professional relationships may be idealistic. The expectations you have about your personal relationships could be idealistic. And if they're idealistic, let me tell you, they are on the line of being dangerous. See, when we have not really examined our expectations, we come to beliefs and conclusions that here's how it should go. My expectation is the roadmap of how it should go. When I do not examine my expectations, I begin to say, here's how it should be done. Anything that is not done this way is not right. It's wrong. And the reality is I haven't really examined my expectations to even know if they're idealistic or whether or not they're realistic. And so we develop a certain pattern, a certain script of expectations that we bring to every relationship. That's right. Listen, you have friendship expectations no matter who they are. Now, you may have greater expectations or you may have significant expectations based upon the type of relationship, but the reality is that you have expectations in all of them. And so without examining these expectations, notice now, without examining these expectations, listen, you could be setting yourself up. You could be setting the relationship up. You could be setting other persons up for disappointment, failure, arguments, and more. I can't tell you how many times that I have talked to people and began to delve into the issues, begin to unravel and unpack what was going on, only to discover at the bottom of the argument, at the bottom of what has gone wrong is simply that they have gotten off track because their expectations set up the wrong path. And so I'm telling you that, listen, I don't care how young you are, I don't care how old you are, I don't care what your gender may be. The reality is that we all bring expectations to any and every relationship. And when we fail to remember the passage that we read in the beginning, and let me read it to you again, expectations not met makes the mind, the will, and emotions sick. That's right. Listen, it will make the mind sick. How? With afflictions, with grief, with disease. Do you not know part of the reason why we have anxiety or we have depression is sometimes based upon simply the fact that our expectations are out of sync with the relationships, out of sync with life. Sometimes those expectations are out of sync with ourselves. And so therefore we have set ourselves up for failure. We have afflicted our own soul because our expectations of ourselves are idealistic. Listen, if you have questions about what we're discussing right now, listen, you can jump right in, put your question there on Facebook or on YouTube, and listen, I will see it and be able to respond to it. And so, listen, this is why, remember, expectations not met make the mind, the will, emotions sick. Listen, you cannot get out of this. You cannot trick yourself out of this. You cannot manipulate this concept. And this is why I'm telling you that this is true across the board. This is spiritually true. This is psychologically true. This is physically true. And that's why it goes on to say, but when expectations are met, there is life, there is joy, there is fulfillment. And listen, I want to help you to be able to know how do you even recognize that your expectations are dangerous. That's right, listen, because the more idealistic they are, the more dangerous they are. And the reality is that as much as you think, as much as I sometimes think that our expectations are just common, they're small, they're kind of doable, that may be true for some, but I would tell you there's a percentage of our expectations that are idealistic instead of being realistic. And therefore, this is why you and I sometimes have the kind of afflictions and the kind of trouble and the kind of internal turmoil because we have expectations that are not doable. That's right. Listen, sometimes you and I have expectations that are not doable. Now, as we progress in this series and as we begin to break this down, we're going to look at this a lot more in depth. But today, we're just laying the foundation so that you can understand that, listen, your expectations, before you begin to sign off on them and you just say, well, you know, the person should have done this, the person should have been able to do this. I'm telling you, you want to put that on hold until we begin to delve a little more into this subject so that you can really stand back and evaluate and examine so that you don't cause personal injury to yourself, to the relationship, or even to the other person. And so let us look at this part. How are expectations developed? Now, I started off saying that, listen, we all come to any and every relationship with expectations. So we can't avoid having them. We can't get around them. So we know that they're there. Listen, the moment you and I took a breath, you and I began to have expectations. That's the reason why babies begin to cry. They can't communicate, but listen, there's something that's wrong about being on the outside of versus on the inside. And they're like, I don't like this. And so they're crying and they're trying to communicate, although they can't put it in words. Their emotion says, something's not right. My expectations aren't being met. And so when you begin to understand that we all have expectations, the question is, how are expectations developed? Listen, how are expectations developed is the question. And so listen here. I want to show you, and we'll just begin to probably get into one of these a day. Expectations are developed through my family of origin. That's right, listen, depending upon the kind of family I was born in. It doesn't matter the type, I'm just saying the ingredients to my family of origin helps to define my expectations. Realistic, idealistic, they help to shape and mold my expectations. Previous relationships help to mold and shape and form my expectations. Number three, listen, the culture. What we're seeing in media, what we see in books, what we see in the friendships that we establish, relationships that we establish. Listen, those impact how we develop expectations. Good expectations, bad expectations, idealistic, realistic expectations. A lot of that comes through recognizing that these are the three areas, primary areas, that begin to shape and mold my expectations. And so therefore, listen, over a lifetime, you and I will build expectations. So my expectations when I was a teenager look different than when I am a young person in my 20s. My expectations in my 30s can look different than my expectations in my 40s. And so recognizing that expectations build over a lifetime, they still have impacts they are still impacted from these three areas: my family of origin, my previous relationships, and the culture. And so therefore, listen, this is why, listen, people that grow up in military families and they travel to different places, that affects their expectations. I have a cousin that was not, there was some turmoil in our family that I didn't know about, I grew up to learn about. And so this particular cousin or cousins on that side, through this particular aunt and uncle, were constantly told negative things about us, constantly kind of withheld from us, constantly kind of separated from us. And so over my lifetime, I had only seen them a few times growing up. And it was interesting that even when we became adults and we were no longer under our parents' rulership, I was talking about, well, you know, now we don't have those kinds of obstacles. I was saying that, listen, you know, we should be able to spend more time, connect, be more intentional about rebuilding the kind of relationships with one another. And one of my cousins says, she says, as much as that is true, she says, I agree. She says, but here's my reality, that when I think of family, I often don't think of you all. And it's hard and it's tough and as sad as that was the reality that her family of origin had shaped her expectations about what relationship looked like with us on this side of the family. And so this is why, listen, I want to talk about first this family of origin. When we're talking about the family of origin, establishing and really having an impact on our expectations. There's a famous psychologist by the name of Erik Erikson. And he talks about these 8 stages of personality that happens over one's lifetime. And this first stage that he talks about is what they call trust versus mistrust. And in this first stage, he's talking about that when a child is born into the world, when a child comes into this earth, and that child takes his or her first breath, that there is this pathway of relationship expectations that are being developed. And the first one that he talked about is whether or not that child develops the ability to trust or to have a mistrust in a world. And he says that it goes something like this, that the way that baby learns how to develop trust is because that child will have his or her needs met in a consistent manner. You remember earlier I was talking about, when the baby comes out and the baby's crying because, all of a sudden I went from a warm to a cold environment and I'm trying to figure out, this isn't what I'm used to. I've been in this warm environment all this long and all of a sudden now I'm in a cold environment. They have to wrap the baby up and do everything so that the baby begins to feel warm again. And so attention to that baby says, I care for you. Says that you can trust me. It says to the baby that, listen, I'm going to be here for you. And so if that infant is not cared for and not fed in such a manner, that infant is more likely to develop a sense of mistrust. And there have been all kinds of studies that they have done in evaluating this particular first stage of development of trust versus mistrust. They've done studies in which sometimes these were studies that were done back in the day, and so they didn't have all the kind of safety measures that they put in place now. But I remember there was even this one study in which there were these babies that were born, not in America, but it was in a foreign country. And they had so many babies that, I think war had broken out. And so a lot of the parents had died. And so these babies were in an orphanage where they didn't have, as many people to care for the children. And so what they found out that the children that had more hugs and had more of a comfort, when they were crying, there was somebody that paid attention to them and came to actually give them adequate attention. Those babies had a better trust with people when they grew up versus the ones that were a little more neglected. And sometimes they were neglected because, they weren't necessarily crying. And so it looked like, hey, they're not crying, they're okay. And so they didn't necessarily get the kind of loving, tender, loving care. And those babies grew up to have a stronger disposition towards mistrusting people. And so therefore, they're saying that this stage really sets the stage when you talk about expectations. Now, Erikson goes on to develop this definition of trust, this trust that says this. Now, I didn't read this part. I think I said it, but I didn't read it. So Erikson's theory argues that following a life of warmth and regularity and protection from the outside world, while in the mother's womb, the infant is faced with a less secure world. I was just talking to you about that. And so here's what Erikson defines as trust. He says trust in infancy sets the stage for lifelong expectation that the world will be good and pleasant and a good and pleasant place to live. Now, over studies over long studies, short-term studies, they have found this to really have a lot of truth to it. And so what happens is that there becomes this vital conflict between trust or mistrust. And so when a parent is consistent and dependable, the baby develops a sense of basic trust. Now, none of us can go back and remember what it was like for us as babies, but we usually, over time, if we're staying in the same household, unless we've kind of changed households, like maybe a parent died and we were therefore raised by a grandparent or maybe an aunt or uncle, or maybe something happened, we were raised in a foster home. The reality is that unless you and I kind of stayed in the same home, we don't really kind of have awareness of kind of what was the pattern there. But if we were in the same home, then we more than likely understood the kind of pattern that was there. And we know, okay, whether or not this was a tender, loving, caring home, whether or not this was a home in which I got my basic needs met. And so if I did not have that kind of experience, it shapes and molds how I see the world and how I see people. Because if my first interaction with those that should have cared for me, those that should have taken care of me, and they left a bad taste in my mouth, then I'm telling you, it's going to be very challenging for you to change your palette of trust versus mistrust when it comes to other people. And Erickson believed that this was a crucial stage. And so the baby builds trust, when they're cold, wet, or hungry, and they can count on others to relieve their pain. The alternative is a sense of mistrust, the feeling that the parent is undependable and that they may not be there when they actually have a need. And here's the reality that when babies develop a sense of trust in their parent, they will show it in their behavior. You can see this when the baby is willing to let them out of their sight without any kind of undue anxiety or rage. Why? Because they know that this person is dependable. They know that this caregiver has my best interests at heart. They know that, this person over time has proven himself or herself, and therefore the baby is no longer panicking. The baby is no longer agitated. Why? Because the baby understands that this is a trusting environment. This is a peaceful environment. This is a trusting environment. And therefore, he says, if babies can emerge from this stage with a favorable balance of trust over mistrust, it's going to help them with their expectations. I'm telling you, your family of origin has shaped and molded you to how you see, how you expect, and why you expect what you expect in relationships. Sometimes we're trying to make up for what we lost in our family of origin, and so we are a little more demanding because we are coming to the relationship with a deficit in this area, and therefore we have an imbalance. And sometimes because of that imbalance, the expectation, or may I say the need, the desire is legitimate, but the expectation is sometimes illegitimate. Sometimes the expectation is idealistic. And therefore, we have these expectations that are just out of whack. And so I'm telling you, if you have a question, you can put it down. I'm looking here on Facebook. I'm looking here on YouTube. I don't see that there are any questions at this point. But this is why I'm telling you that, expectations are vital for our understanding. Expectations are vital for our relationships. And notice now, hope is the expectation that good things will happen in the future. Hope is the expectation that good things will happen in the future. And hope enables the person to move forward into a world and to take up new challenges. Could it be that some of our expectations are a little off simply because of what happened in our last relationship? Is it possible that our expectations are a little idealistic because of what happened with us and our siblings? Is it possible that the expectations that you and I have may be a little idealistic because they haven't really been examined? And so therefore we have conflict in relationships because we have unexamined expectations that are not fitting, that are not realistic for the relationship. Or maybe it's not necessarily for the relationship. Maybe it's for the timing of the expectation. Maybe your expectation is good, but the timing of it is just a little idealistic. You know how when you call somebody and you really have something on your heart that you want to share, and immediately when they answer the phone, you begin to talk as if somehow just simply because they answer the phone means that they are available. And then you find out that the person really isn't listening, and simply because, you know what, they're already kind of busy, but they didn't want to tell you, you know, I can't talk right now. And so therefore you get upset, you get angry because it's like, I'm sharing my heart, I'm sharing something important, and you're not paying attention simply because my expectation for that moment was idealistic. Good desire, good intention, but the moment made my expectation off. And so therefore, Erickson believed that if the infant developed a sense of mistrust in the world, he or she could possibly have trust issues in every relationship because he or she never learned to trust the first person in the world that he or she met. And so I am telling you that your expectations matter. Your expectations are important. But unexamined expectations are the seed of conflict and trouble. And so as we bring this to an end, here's what I say to you. And I'm looking to see whether or not there is any questions. I don't see any questions. Here's what I'm sharing with you. Whether you're looking to improve a love relationship, a familial or family relationships, or friendship, or employee versus employer, supervisor, co-worker relationship, understanding your expectation will bring a new diamond to the situation. Because when I understand whether or not my expectation is realistic, it's idealistic, and there's some other components we're going to get into, not this week, but in the following weeks, it begins to help me to understand that maybe the affliction that I'm experiencing, maybe I brought it on myself. Maybe the discomfort and the challenge that I'm having in my relationship was brought on because I didn't really examine my expectations. And therefore, it has caused some grief in my life. Maybe it has even caused some disease in my life. Simply because my expectations have not been examined. My expectations have not been challenged. And listen, all of our expectations have to be examined to know whether or not they're even realistic for ourselves, for the relationship, or even for the other person or persons. And so listen, I hope that there has been something that has really transpired here in this time that we have been together today. I hope that you would really take something out of this time, that this would really help you in your relationship, especially if you're in a place right now where there's some real challenges that you're facing. There's some real decisions that you're having to comb through. And I'm saying to you that, listen, you may have to go back and watch this, because usually when our expectations are really layered, and what I mean by that is that they're so rooted in who we are that it takes time to really uproot them and to see them for what they're worth and to really be honest and objective with ourselves. Sometimes it takes some time to really pull through that, to comb through it, and to really look at it. And I'm saying take the time Now, here's the other thing I'll tell you that, listen, we are here for you. If you say, listen, I'm really needing to have some objective. Listen, I'm so entangled in this. I really can't see my way through, and I really need some outside eyes to look through this. Now, I'm saying to you, then listen, this is what we're here for, because we want you to be maximized in your relationship. We want you to be empowered in your relationships. And so, listen, we're here to help you. And so if that is something that you need, then all you have to do is let us know, and we'll be sure to get in contact with you, and we would work through it. And so today, listen, we've just combed the surface of talking about dangerous expectations by recognizing, what does expectations look like? Where do they come from? Because listen, without you and I looking at them for what they're worth, sometimes we may assume that they have all the value in the world and everybody else should be able to make it happen. And the reality is, sometimes the sad reality is that that's just not true. And so listen, I thank you so much for being here today. I thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to really strengthen, empower, and to impact your relationships today. And so listen, this is Ruffin' It. Listen, I want to say to you again, listen, if you're on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button, that you hit the bell icon so that you're able to really make this happen, so that when we come live, you can get those notifications. You can be aware of it. Listen, if you're on our Facebook page, listen, be sure to like our Facebook page. If you're watching this on a watch party, somebody brought you over, no problem. Listen, go to LifeEmpowermentCh on Facebook and like our page, and then follow us so that you can once again get these notifications, be aware when we are going to go live. And so listen, we thank you so much for doing just that. Listen, here's another thing I want to let you know, that listen, this is brought to you by LifeEmpowermentCh. And so listen, we encourage you to partner with us. If this has really been a help, this has really been a blessing to you, listen, this comes because, listen, I have 2 masters. That's right, listen, I've gone to school, I have 2 masters. I've studied, prepared, put this together for your enrichment. And I'm just asking that if it's been a blessing to you, that you would support LifeEmpowermentCh. And so, listen, you can do that by filling out, by using the Cash App. You can do that by utilizing PayPal. If PayPal is your preference, that information is there on the screen. Listen, if you like to mail a check or send a money order, that information is there on the screen. That is our mailing address. And so we want to make sure that you have everything that you need to be empowered to make that transaction. Maybe you want to go to our website and you want to give online. Then listen, we thank you for being able to do just that. And so listen, this is LifeEmpowermentCh. Listen, I am Pastor Marcus, Therapist Marcus. And listen, I'm glad to have been here with you today. Just want to let you know that, listen, once again, we have our prayer that's coming up tomorrow. Listen, we have prayer that's coming up tomorrow at 12 p.m. noon. That's right. Listen, we want to agree with you in prayer. There's some things on your heart. There's some things happening in your life. And sometimes it's just great just to be in an environment of prayer. And so, listen, we just want to encourage you to come out, be with us. It's about 30, 40 minutes. And listen, we thank you so much for making that happen. Listen, we want to just encourage you to come back again next week as we are here for Ruffin' It, 4 p.m. on Thursday, Pacific Standard Time. And so, listen, we thank you for being here. Thank you for enjoying this time. And we pray that this strengthens, catapults, and fortifies your relationships so that you can have fulfillment, you can have joy, you can have a lifelong relationship. All right, so listen, this is Pastor and Therapist Marcus, and I look forward to seeing you again. You be blessed.